My wife and I were thinking about going to the highest point in Mississippi this weekend. And it's not even that high. It's only 800 feet. It's like a pimple.
It's like a pimple. Ew.
Alrighty. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Unfolding Revelation podcast series presented in partnership with Wayfarers Christian Church. My name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor at Wayfarers, and I am joined once again by our professor here at Mid-South Christian College and Revelation superfan, Greg Waddell. And then also... I got to come up with a better term for you, Zach, besides the guy we found on the side of the street.
He's kind of a Indiana Jones type.
Yeah.
Explorer. What could we call him?
I like that. I like that. Zach is quite the explorer. He's more of an outdoorsman. I'm more of an indoorsman. We balance each other in that way very well. So yeah, we'll call Zach our explorer friend, exploring nature, exploring the outdoors, exploring Revelation.
You make me sound like a guest star on Bubble Guppies or something.
We'll figure out a better title for you, Zach. We got several more episodes to go here.
Yes, we do.
If this is your first time joining us, I would encourage you go back and check out the last two parts that we've done. These are introduction episodes as we have been kind of introducing some important concepts that we think are helpful to have in mind before we jump straight into the book. We think a lot of people who jump into Revelation, we make the mistake of jumping straight in, and you kind of get in over your head very quickly, and it's hard to understand it without some guidelines and some structure ahead of
I know
ourselves.
we're impatient to get into it, but as I said to somebody one time, patience, my son. We've been waiting 2,000 years to understand this book. You can wait a few more weeks.
Absolutely.
And then he got punched.
And so, as I said earlier, it's helpful to kind of have a structure to be able to place a lot of these concepts in. And so that's the thing that we're focusing on today. We are focusing on the structure of the book. Mm-hmm. We mentioned last week as we were teasing this that for some reason this is the thing that people get. This is one of those things that people get like really defensive about, their understanding of the structure of the book. But once again, I will remind you what we said at the very beginning. We hope that you would engage with us, show us a little bit of mercy and grace as we are looking at this book and really hoping to understand it. And we hope that we'd be able to emphasize, to embody that really well and just be able to have a little bit of humility as we're looking through this book. So this is our understanding of how this book is structured, and we would love to kind of open that dialogue up with you all as well as we look into it.
Well, I don't want to assume necessarily that it's you guys' understanding as well, but we'll find out.
We will find out. So we're jumping straight in here. There is some things that you brought up that you're going to bring up for us here, Greg, about some propositions, some important observations that it's important to have in front of us as we are looking at the structure. And these aren't original to you. You got these from somebody. So tell us a little bit about where these came from.
Yeah, it comes from
a
book by William Hendrickson called More Than Conquerors. It was written a long time ago, 1940. But to show you how good it is, it has been published every year since then. And that's a sign of a book that people really have liked. And what he did was basically he saw these patterns in the book, and he presents these propositions. And so with the idea is that, hey, these are propositions. In a proposition like anything, you check it out. You check it out. Does this, he claims that this actually is a reflection of what we actually have in the text. He's not imposing this. This is what he found when he examined the text.
Yeah.
So it should be
propositions. I like observations is kind of what we're saying.
Observations.
These are just things he has observed in the text. We're not making any statements there, but these are good things to observe.
So, and they're verifiable. You should be able to go and check and see if it's actually that way, right?
No, you should never read raw text on your own. That's dangerous.
So let's jump straight in, Greg. What's the first of these propositions?
Like the first one is the Book of Revelation. This is probably the biggest one of all. Okay, this is the one that people might have difficulty with, but I would encourage you not just to reject it outright, but to go and check out the reasons why. The Book of Revelation consists of 7 parallel sections, each of which covers the entire Christian era. Now that's huge, because most people think of the Book of Revelation as chronological, as written chronologically. And that so in such a way that you start at the beginning, you're further away from the end of time, and the closer you get to chapter 22, the closer and closer you get to the end of time. He's claiming that it's not written that way at all.
So you're saying that the book consists of 7 sections that you can put them all right next to each other.
Each one
is covering the same
time.
Yeah, it's kind of like 7 points of view on the same period of time. You're switching to a different camera angle.
That'd be one way of thinking about it.
Of the same period of time that's being covered in this. And I think the thing I'm curious about is you're saying it covers the entire new dispensation. That's a big word. What does that mean?
Oh, dispensation. Sorry about that. That just simply means the Christian. I actually said Christian era, even though the slide that we're looking at says dispensation. Dispensation is theologians' fancy word. We're always coming up with fancy words, to say a period of time.
So kind of like this is the church age?
Church age.
Oh, okay.
Church age. Yeah, it'd be from the
I've heard that before, but I've never
resurrection
heard
of Jesus until the second coming of Jesus.
And so that's interesting too. You're saying that the entire book covers that whole section.
Each section of the book.
Each section of the book covers the entire
period.
church age.
Yeah.
All right. That's our first point.
Yeah, first point. Okay, number 2. We can group the 7 sections into 2 main sections, chapters 1 through 11 and 12 through 22. And the first of those, 1 through 11, is really focused more on conflict on the earth. And within that section where it's talking about conflict on the earth, it uses specific historical places and people. In other words, it uses symbols to represent specific places and people in John's day. But these people and these places embody principles present throughout the history of the church. So he's given us examples of things that we will see that exemplify principles that will be in effect throughout all of history.
You'll see them again.
You'll see them again and again and again. And we're probably seeing them today.
Yeah.
Today, right now.
Yeah.
And then the second half, or chapters 12 through 22, is conflict in heaven. This is where he's looking at the same principles, but now from the perspective of heaven, as if he's pulling open the curtain and letting us see what it looks like from God's perspective, from the spiritual dimension.
I wish does it say wherever about the 7 sections? Because I've never heard that before.
We're going to look at the actual evidence here in a little bit here. Third principle is that it presents one coherent story. So it's consistent within itself, which is basically what Christians claim about other books of the Bible as well. Number 4 is there is an ascending intensity as you go. Even though it's parallel, each section is more intense than the previous one. And it leads to a final climax as well.
So each time it switches to a different camera angle, you're getting more action.
More saturation in the colors.
Yeah, it's brighter. I like this metaphor. I've got my little camera angle switcher here if you're watching the video of this, so you know.
He's just going nuts, doing everything.
Switching all the camera
And number
views.
5 is that it uses moving imagery. In other words, visual imagery, moving imagery. This is why someday I would love, with all the technology we have today, they could make a wonderful movie of the book of Revelation without even doing any interpretation. Just visualize what it's actually saying.
Are you saying you can't get better than Nick Cage?
I can't do that, but if they could do Lord of the Rings and stuff like that,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
imagine what they could do with this. But it's moving imagery. The idea is that we not only think, but we see what he's talking about. And number 6 is these images do not point to specific future events, but to principles that symbolize future and present events, present for John.
And this is probably one of the more controversial points that some
Right.
people would disagree with if they were to look at this proposition. They would say, no, the book of Revelation is telling us what's going to happen in the future.
Now, obviously, the last section when it's talking about the new earth and the new heavens, that's future. You know, so it does include future, but that's not the main. And that's the end of it is mostly about that future. So basically, it's not meant to be a secret map to help people determine the time of the Lord's return or something like that. It's more like a handbook, a travel handbook, which you've probably used travel handbooks before, right?
Mr. Explorer.
Yeah, Mr. Explorer.
Learned how to use them the wrong way.
And when you get these, you have the travel tips, like the opportunities that you're going to run into when you go to Timbuktu. And you're going to have potential pitfalls that you're going to find along the way. And you're going to have dangerous animals you're going to run into, maybe. And what to do if you do. And the appropriate behavior in certain cultures, in certain places. And how about what to expect if you complete the journey. I think that describes the book of Revelation. It's basically, it's a travel guide as we go through life and as the church goes through history.
So the idea being here, especially that it's not like a Da Vinci Code thing where you've got to decode the code that you can identify the events that are happening, but rather it is a set of repeating principles that you're going to continue to see over and over again throughout the church age. Things to look out for.
Yep.
It's a travel guide in that way.
And I think that's one of the reasons why every age of the Christian church, they've always had groups within the church saying, we are in the last days, this is it. And even prophets who've claimed they've actually tried to, say the date, and they've always, it's countless, the books, I'm thinking in Spanish, the books that have been written and so forth, where somebody has tried to predict Jesus' return. It's because the principles are active throughout history.
And they do continue to repeat.
To repeat.
The whole point being that, like you're saying, everybody in every point in church history has been like, this book is about right now. Yeah. I can totally see exactly what this book is talking about happening right now.
Yep.
And we got to ask ourselves, why has everybody been so convinced that right now is what that book is talking about? Yeah. And it's maybe because there's nothing new under the sun, and a lot of us are experiencing the same things that so many of us as Christians have experienced for thousands of years.
Well, one of the things I can confirm about that is, so I spent a lot of time at Brit Hadashah's Messianic synagogue down the road. One of my high school teachers was from there, right? And he taught Old Testament history and everything. And one of his main things was, like, what we don't teach is, like, the prophets, like, Hebrew prophecy is different than what we think about. Like, a prophet says a thing in our culture, somewhere down the road it gets fulfilled, like you go from point A to point B and that's it. But Hebrew prophecy is like it goes in a spiral where point A is the middle and it gets fulfilled here and then here.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then here. And somewhere along the line is the ultimate fulfillment.
The point being that it's not just like a direct line between prophet says something and then there's a direct fulfillment of that prophecy. Yeah. But
plus
it is a thing that,
and widening and expanding.
It's getting brighter, more saturated.
It's
clearer.
And each time it's repeated, it's more clear.
Like there have been many antichrists so far.
Yeah.
And so
They were present in John's day. He says so in his epistles.
Yeah, he says he actually says so in his letters to the churches. He says that we've already seen many antichrists. All right.
So there is a seventh
Okay.
principle here, and that is that this imagery is rooted in contemporary events that were happening in John's day. So we will see them reflected. And they're also, this is very important, rooted in the scriptures. They're rooted in the scriptures, as we mentioned, I think, last one. And they're rooted in the mind of God. The apocalypse is rooted in God's mind and his revelation. God in Christ is the true author of the book. Historically, there have been different ways that Christians have approached the book, and there's names for these. I hate putting out those big, weird theological words.
Yeah, nobody's gonna know the full. Yeah.
I wish I could come up with something simpler. But
So what's the first one?
the first model is, here's one of those big, weird words, preterist.
Preterist.
Yeah, it comes from the idea that I think it's the Greek word for past tense, preterist. And these are those who see almost all of the book as already fulfilled, already done with, except for a little bit that's in the present, that's talking about the present, and usually that little bit would be referring to the final days before Jesus' return.
So you got 90% of this book is talking about things that are happening in John's day, and then you got like a little 10% at the very end that's like, well, the very end of everything.
Yeah, that's called preterist.
Okay. This probably isn't as common of a view.
It's pretty common. You'd be surprised.
I'm saying in like in the American South, in the evangelical church,
right. Yeah,
in the Bible Belt,
right.
You don't get a lot of this preterist view, but in certain high church denominations or older denominations, I've seen this.
Yeah,
a little bit more.
older denominations.
Yeah, and in a lot of academic circles, I think I've seen this be one of the kind of predominant views.
Yeah.
So, what's the other one?
So the next one is historicist. That's a little easier to understand. This is the most common. Okay, this is the view that the book is presented as a chronology. So chapter 3 is closer to the end of time than chapter 5 is, and chapter 17 is closer to the end of time than chapter 14 is. So it's chronologically progresses in a chronological sequential. It's a sequential chronological roadmap to the future, basically. So usually people that believe this think that we're right on almost that last area of the chronology. So everybody who has taken this position believes that they're in the final days.
Oh, so it's like for the past 2,000 years, this has been that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then there's the futurist. They believe that almost everything is in the future. The whole book is mostly future, except for maybe the first chapters 2 and 3, where it's talking the letters to the churches. That's the only part that's past tense. Now, I take what I call a principalist approach. As I already mentioned, that these are that they are symbols and references from the days, from the time of John when he wrote, and from the experience of the church, and from the Old Testament, that represent principles that are active throughout all of history. And these principles, this description of these principles, sometimes they're talking about things on the earth. That's why you get in this slide the up and down movement, like a wave. Sometimes it's talking about things that are happening on the earth, and sometimes things that are happening in heaven, in the spiritual realm, and it goes back and forth like that. And gradually it gets to the final future, which is the return of Christ and the establishment of the new heavens and new earth.
So would you say that this view would line up with maybe what Zach's teacher was?
Yeah, it sounds like that idea of the spiral, I think, is a similar idea.
So it's like there's things that were happening in John's day that perfectly match to the stuff that's being talked about in this book.
Yes.
And there's things that happened in Martin Luther's day that also match up with things that are happening in this book. and there's things that happened in World War II times
Yep.
that match up with things that are happening in this book, and things that are happening today with us.
Absolutely.
And the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And yep.
So then the question would be, do you believe that there's some sort of final time around the merry-go-round?
Oh yeah,
That is the ultimate
I
fulfillment
think-
of these?
Yeah, I think I don't know if we'll be able to identify that, because I pretty much think that Jesus could come anytime he wants. You know?
Right.
And I think as we get to the last chapters, that's definitely looking at the final state. You have the New Jerusalem described there. You have the new heavens and new earth described there. You have Satan is cast into the lake of fire. That's it, man. That's this is over. Everybody out of the pool.
So,
And then throwing everybody back in the pool.
A different pool.
Well, yeah.
so what do you think is the value of this point of view? Because like you said, this one is yours. Where do you think is an area?
It started with Hendrickson, so
Sure.
it's not mine.
Not yours. You don't own
I didn't
it.
invent this.
But it's the one that you
I think-
have found the most value in.
Yeah, I think it reflects the actual text the best.
Yeah. And do you think that there, like you said, you're not sure that we're going to be able to know whether we're in that last time around the cycle or not?
Right.
Is that a useful part of thinking about this? Is
Yeah,
that we
I
don't
think
get
so.
too obsessed
That
with
we don't
the
get
end?
too obsessed with trying to figure out when it's going to happen. That's really dangerous. A lot of cults have been started that way. And that we realize that we're always ready. We're always ready. Remember that Jesus said that not only the Father knows the time of his return, not even the Son knows. So I think it's a pretty healthy thing to say, yeah, well, the early church expected him to come back in their day. So why shouldn't we?
So, yeah, this could be the last time around the cycle. That'd be great.
Might
But
be.
there's probably some humility in understanding that other times throughout church history, they've had their ways around, their trips around this cycle as well.
Exactly.
And
I mean, just think about
if Jesus doesn't know, then it's a little bit presumptive of us to assume that we do.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some evidence for this, right? It can't
I
just
think
be
so.
something that I just like it, so that's why I'm going to this.
Right. That was Hendrickson's claim, and he presents it in his book pretty well. But for example, evidence of the cyclical structures, each section concludes with the end of the age. The end of the age doesn't come just at the end of the book of Revelation. You see it throughout in various areas. There are several sections that have the same duration of time. There's a lot of similarities between the trumpets and the cups, which we'll talk about later. Satan and his colleagues fall at the end of two sections. So if Satan's fallen and gone, that's the end, man. I mean, that's the end of this present age. Several sections end with a great battle.
A lot of Psalms do too.
Yep. Yeah. In Revelation 6, for example, I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it was rolled, and it was rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Now, that sounds like the end, doesn't it to you?
Right. But this is chapter 6.
But we're in chapter 6. How can we be at the end already?
So this is a good example. There's several times where it's like, oh, this is the end of the story.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, it's starting back over
And it
again.
starts back up again.
Oh, this is the end of the story.
Yeah.
And then, oh, no, it's starting back up again. And noticing that cycle should key us into the fact that there is something going on here. And so the proposition you've made is that there's 7 of these cycles.
Yep, 7
correct?
cycles. Yep.
And so I've heard that before. I've heard of some people who have said there's like 2 cycles and they split it into halves. So I've heard it,
That would be, if they took 2 cycles to split in half, that'd be 4, wouldn't it? Splitting.
I guess so.
That's why
So-
we're into photography, not algebra.
So there's different ways to split apart the book, but something that is
Different
important.
ways to cut a cake, right?
Yeah, right. But an important thing that is kind of hard to deny is that there's a lot of repetition,
Yeah.
and there's obviously something going on, and so the best way forward, we think, for this is that there is a cyclical structure going on.
Oh, for sure.
So there are some other reasons to think that that makes sense, right? You know, besides just what we're seeing in the book itself, correct?
Yeah, well, parallelism is pretty common in Jewish literature. Usually not to this extent, covering an entire book, but because Revelation is different.
Yeah.
It's very different from any book in the Bible.
Yeah.
But parallelism is the way the ancient Jews would think in
Right.
their poetry. And also, while all the cycles cover the same period, they each emphasize something slightly different. So there is logic to the repetition. There's also progress in the repetition. And the parallel structures give a sense of rhythm and balance. We know that in other areas like music even.
Yeah.
Parallel structures reinforce learning through repetition. And so that's an important point. And also the parallel structure tells the reader that Jesus was talking about principles and not a map of the future. Not a map that we could, figure out what's going on in Russia right now and find it in the Bible, for example. We might find the principles, but it's not that he specifically had that in mind when he wrote it.
Interesting. So, it's not crazy to think that a Jewish person would have seen this and it would have made sense to them.
Not crazy at all. It's crazy. It sounds crazy to us.
It
because
sounds
it's so
weird to us because
different.
we don't think this
We don't
way.
think that way. And we don't
But-
write that way.
Zach, like you were talking about, it's in the other prophetic books as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
something that your Jewish teacher was like, no, yeah, that totally makes sense. Of course it works that way. So,
We'll have to see if it actually
yeah, that's what I was about to say. This is all really interesting. I'm excited to dive into the text and start seeing some of these structures. But why don't you kind of give us an outline of what you've covered so far
Okay.
and how it fits into these cycles that we've talked about?
Yeah, so I said, as I mentioned, there are two main sections: conflict on earth, which would be chapters 1 through 11, and conflict in heaven, which would be chapters 12 through 22. The first section on earth is Christ in the midst of the seven candlesticks. That's chapters 1 to 3. You have the scroll and the seven seals, chapters 4 to 7. You have the trumpet, the seven trumpets of judgment, chapters 8 through 11. And then in the second section, you have the woman, her son, and the dragon, chapters 12 through 14. You have the seven cups of wrath, chapters 15 to 16. And you have the fall of the great prostitute and the beasts, chapters 17 through 19.
So that's
And
6.
That's okay. Let's go. And
There we
then
go.
you have the dragon judge the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem,
All right.
chapters 20 through 22.
We got to that good Bible number of 7 here. I like that. But that is another good defense for 7
Yeah, because he
cycles.
uses 7 a lot.
Numbers were important to the Jewish people, and 7 was a good number.
Yep.
So
It was the perfect number.
it would make a lot more sense that there would be 7 cycles than that there would be 6.
Yeah. For sure.
All right. So, like I said, this is helpful to really see this and to understand this. I think you've convinced me, Greg. I think this is is a good way to look at it. I want to, this is the lens that we're going to be using as we look through this cycle or this book. So we've got one more introduction section after this one. What are we covering in that one?
I think we're going to be covering language, how to look at figurative language. It's important to understand how to interpret figurative language. Because this is largely a book that uses a lot of metaphors. And, yeah.
So we want to make sure that we are understanding the genre that we're reading
Right.
and the type of language that we're reading.
Because there's a lot of idioms in there.
Yeah.
Euphemisms,
Yeah. Fun.
Not idiots, idioms. Right?
Well, depends on who you're talking with.
All right. So we'll get into our last introduction section after this one, and then we're going to be looking at the book after that. So thank you guys for joining in with us, and we will see y'all next time. All right.
So
Maybe she's born with it.
make it what?
Maybe it's the Antichrist.